Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at hooking up our character movement so that we can move forward, strafe, and look around our world. The classics of moving around in a first-person or third-person shooter. Let's dive in and see how it's done. So continuing along in the vein of trying to get our character movement working, we are first of all going to want to bind some input, but we're also going to want to know what to bind that input to. Fortunately, when it comes to characters, there's a lot of simplifying stuff going on for us. After all, Unreal really is an engine that's optimized for making things like shooter games, character games. And let's have a look at some of the movement functions that are already provided for us by the character actor class. Not just the character movement component, but also the character actor class provides these, and it often passes a lot of this on to the character movement component, but not necessarily. So let's see what movement functions we're going to be dealing with. First of all, there's going to be add movement input. Add movement input basically takes a vector and tells you which direction you're going to move in. So if it's a forward vector, you move forward. If it's a backwards vector, you move backwards. If it's a right vector, you move right, and so on. And the size of the vector is going to determine how fast you move in that direction. The next thing is we've got add controller pitch input. So that's about looking up and down, which is obviously very useful when you've got your mouse. You want to be looking up and down by moving your mouse up and down. Then there's add controller yaw input, which is going left and right. And finally, there is a jump function, which is just that. Maybe you hit the spacebar and you jump. So with these things in mind, what we want to go ahead and do is create some bindings in our character actor class that bind some input, or some inputs from your keyboard, your mouse, your controller, to these functions. So we're going to do a few, and then we're going to do a challenge to do the rest. So let's go over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm in my shooter character.h, and we notice that we've got already here the setup player input component function. This is where we need to bind our input. I'm going to hit F12 to go over to the C++. I'm going to hit Alt-O to go over to the C++ and find where we've got that set up. So the first thing is it gives us this player input component that we want to bind with. If you remember, this is the way we do it. We have a player input component. We use the arrow operator, and we then do a bind function here. So it's either a bind axis or it's going to be a bind action, depending on whether it's a discrete action such as jump, or whether it is an action that has a value, such as looking up and down or moving. Now, even when we do movement with a key, we still tend to bind it using an axis. So I'm actually going to be making a bit of a typo for the first part of this video. I will correct it later on, but do go ahead and use the bind axis instead of bind action here. So really, to take a step even further back, we need to go ahead and set up these actions and axes in our project settings. So let's go back over into Unreal, go to Settings, Project Settings, and then I'm going to dock this down so we can see it very clearly. And we're going to go to the Input section, so Engine Input, and set up some axes mappings and some action mappings. So the ones I'm going to deal with right off the bat are the axes mappings for, we're going to have first of all a move forward, and we're going to have also a look up. Now remember, we don't have a move forward and a move backwards because we can just do that with negative scale. So for example, I want to set up my W key to be my move forward. So that is scale 1. But if I want my S key to be my move back, I can still use move forward, but give it the scale of -1. Just a quick reminder for you. Same with look up. I'm going to be using the mouse for this. We'll cover controller input in the next lecture. We're going to use the mouse Y. Now remember, Y is the one that goes up and down rather than left and right, because it's kind of a bit taller, isn't it? A Y is a little bit of a taller letter than an X. That's how I remember it anyway. So mouse Y is up and down. And then we'll have to tweak with the scale, see whether it's going in the right direction. But basically, this will give us negative values if we're going down and positive values if we're going up. So we may need to tweak with look up to see whether this is going to go in the right direction. But you get the idea. We can either invert the scale or not, depending on the type of input that's coming in here. So once we've got the axis name, we can go back into the C++. We're going to bind it using the text macro and the text of the axis name. Then we need to say who we're going to call the function on and what function we're going to call. We currently don't have a function that we want to call, so I'm going to go and create a new private function over in my C++ header file, and it is going to be a void function that is going to be called move forward, and it's going to take the float, which is going to be the axis value, finish off with a semicolon, and I've got a little trick, a little extension here that helps me implement these things a little bit quicker by doing Control-Shift-P, and if I type in create implementation, it goes ahead and creates that implementation for me in the C++ file. Really nice and easy. The name of that extension, if I go over, I always forget the names of my extensions, so I'll go and have a look for what it might be. Ah yes, it's this little doozy here, the C++ helper. If you go ahead and install this one for your VS Code, it just allows you to do that sort of thing, which is very nice, very handy. So this is the function that we want to set it up to call. So first of all, we say this is the target. The current object is the target for this function. Then we go ahead and put in the aShooter, the fully qualified function, aShooter character, : move forward, and that should bind us to this function. And then finally, what we want to do is pass that axis value on to the function that we actually want to call, which is a parent function. So we don't have to do anything. We can just do add movement input, like so. So because this is the move forward method, we want to have the forward vector of the actor. So the way we do that is we can do a get actor forward vector, like so. And then we want it to be forward in the amount that our axis value gives us, so we can multiply by the axis value, and that's going to give us the right result. So we're going to have the forward vector multiplied by the axis value. If it's 1, we go forward. If it's -1, a forward vector becomes a backwards vector, and we're going backwards with just this one function. So that's set us up with our move forward. Great. The next thing is to bind for our look up. So let's go and copy. I always like to copy these string references so that I don't make a mistake. Do a lookup, and instead of binding to move forward, let's go back to the header file and create something new. It's going to be look up, and again a float axis value, like so. And if I do Control-Shift-P and do create implementation, it goes ahead and saves me a little bit of time. And this time, instead of doing add movement inputs, we want to use one of those other functions that we had at our disposal. Namely the add controller pitch input, because we want to pitch up, basically. So this time we can do add controller pitch input and pass in directly the axis value. Now the a bit more experienced C++ programmers among you might say, hey, this function basically does nothing. It is just calling some other function with the same parameter, so it's not really doing very much, and you would be right. So what we could do is we could do the aShooter character look up, so we could call the function that was defined on this class, the aShooter character. Or we could say, well, there's add control pitch input, that we could just call that directly, couldn't we? So if we use F12 to find out where that's defined, and you go and navigate to it, you can see that it is being defined in actually pawn.h. So if you scroll up, you can see all the way up here somewhere, we're going to find a class. We could even just search for class, space, something like that. And here we've got a pawn is the class. So let's go back to the shooter character. And what we can try and just make this a little bit shorter by saying, instead, let's do a pawn : add controller pitch input, so that it automatically just directly calls that parent function rather than having to go via our own function. This is a valid way to do it as well, but it's just not necessary. So I'm going to comment it out so that you can refer to it and see it if you wanted to do it that way. But I would recommend doing it the slightly shorter route like so. Oh, and in trying to compile it, I noticed that instead of calling bind axis as I'd been wanting to do, I've been doing bind action. So you've probably been screaming at your screen the whole time. Let's go ahead and build that again. By the way, I'm doing that with a Control-Shift-B and selecting the build option that is the Simple Shooter Editor Win64 development build, which is just a quicker way for me than going over and hitting the compile button. Oh, look, and I can't get my syntax right today. Of course, we need to use the ampersand in front of this function to say basically that we want to get the pointer. We want to use the ampersand in front of these functions to actually have the correct syntax here. Okay, so after I corrected those two very common errors, one being that I'd got the wrong function call, and the other being that I hadn't got an ampersand in front of the functions I'm trying to use. Let's go over into Unreal and see whether this is actually working. If I go ahead and hit play and use the W key and the S key, you can see I can move forward and backwards. It's amazing. And with the mouse, I can look up and down, but it is feeling inverted at the moment to my movement. So I'm just going to go over to the project settings and hit -1 in there, and go ahead and hit play. And now if I go up and down, it feels correct. Notice that I'm actually spawning in two different locations. That's because I have 2 player starts. When I put this second one in, I didn't realize there was already one in the level, which is why I'm sometimes spawning here, sometimes spawning in a different location. You might find the same thing. So it is challenge time. Let's get you guys binding your move rights and your look rights so that we've got full control of our movement. So repeat the process that I've just done in the lecture for both of these two, and you've probably been following along. If not, you can go and watch to revise. And also, I'd like you to attempt the jump function as well if you're feeling brave. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So let's give this a shot. First of all, we're repeating the above steps for move forward and look up. So we're going to be having move right, and we're going to be having, instead of look up, we're going to be having look right. And we can go ahead and copy these to set up our axes in the project settings. So add another couple of axes mappings. The first one's going to be move right, which I'm going to map to the key A for left. So that's going to be the -1. A is going to be -1 because it's actually left, the opposite of right. And D is going to be for going right. Now, obviously, you can add in your arrow keys here as well. I'm just not doing that to save time, but you can go ahead and do the same thing. You can just add more keys here, as many keys as you like, to map to that single axis. Look right, we're going to use the mouse X. And I think 1 should be sufficient rather than -1. I don't think we have to invert this one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bind this slightly differently. So I'm going to go Alt-O to go and create ourselves a move right function here. Now you might be wondering, why are we doing this differently? Why is move right? Why are we not just calling straight to add movement input? The difference is here we're doing a bit of calculation. We're adding in this multiplication by a vector, which is adding a bit of information and justifying the existence for this function. So this time, instead of getting the actor forward, we want to get the actor right vector, like so, and multiply it by the axis value. And then we want to be calling, instead of move forward, we want to be calling move right. Now, for look right, instead of adding the controller pitch input, we want to be doing the yaw input. Remember, roll, pitch, and yaw from airplanes. You can look it up on Wikipedia if you're not sure which one is which. I can go ahead and build that one. Hopefully this time I haven't got the syntax wrong. Let's dive over to the editor and hit play. And there you go. I can look all the way around me. That's looking good. I can strafe left and right. I can go forward and backwards. So the thing left for us is jump, which is going to be an action mapping rather than an axis because it's a discrete action. I'm going to call it jump and copy it. Go over to Visual Studio Code and just close down my compile window. And here I'm going to, instead of binding an axis, you've got it, I'm going to be binding a action. Bind action. Simple as that. I'm going to start off still with the text here of jump. But the thing that is different with axes, as you probably remember, is we need to use this syntax. I input event, which is an enum, which means that it basically can take a number of these different options: double click, press, release, etc. We're going to want to jump on press, like so. So that's IE underscore pressed. And then once we know that, we can go ahead and do the same this. And then we want to be calling to jump. Now, where is jump defined? Is it in the pawn? Let's have a look. Nope, but it might be in the character. So I'm going to do Control P and look for character .h. Open that up and just have a look through here. See if they have a jump function defined in here. Jump and then open brackets often is a good way to look for functions within the header files. Sure enough, we have got that function. You can see the documentation. I often like to use the source code directly rather than looking up any documentation files. I just find it sometimes a lot quicker to access, especially when you have access to Control P in Visual Studio Code. So what we need to do is, instead of going pawn : : we need to do a character : : So it is going to be ampersand a character : : This is because that's the class it's defined on. We can't go looking up the hierarchy when we're doing this : operator. And then it's just going to be jump. So character : jump. And don't forget that I need a semicolon on the end of the line. Go ahead and build and see whether we're able to jump now. Well, the build worked out correctly. Let's go over to the sandbox level, hit play, and try and jump. Oh, I don't have any key bound, so that might hamper me. Add the spacebar in as the key that I want for jump, and go ahead and hit play. Yay, I'm able to jump up and down and move through the air and move around. Fantastic. So we've learnt how to bind our axes and actions. Well, we haven't learnt it, we have revised it, but we've seen what we want to bind to in a character in order to get that classic character jumping, strafing, moving, and looking with your camera that we all know and love from our shooters. In the next lecture, we'll look at the nuances required for moving with a controller as well as a keyboard and a mouse.